People like tier list content, right? Yeah, I think so. I'll get right into it, but I'll say up front that obviously I don't think my opinion is objectively correct or anything. If you have any disagreements about whatever I say here, I would love to hear about them. Ever since making these Final Fantasy V videos, I've learned a lot of things I never even would have thought of from several comments, and I'm sure this video will be no exception. Anyways, here we go. The top two is definitely swords and knives, and I expect most people will probably agree with this. I don't think it's a surprise that these two would be the best. It's probably by design, considering some of the strongest weapons are the chicken knife, the brave blade, Excalibur, and Ragnarok. And if we're counting advanced content, there's also the Ultima weapon. I think there's arguments to be made for either of these to be over the other, but I'm of the opinion that knives are the best weapon type. And really, it's mostly because of the chicken knife being the best weapon in the game. Knives, as well as several other weapons and weapon types, are actually supposed to use your agility stat in the damage calculation, but they're bugged so that they either use 1 or 0 agility instead. The chicken knife is actually the only knife in the game that is not bugged in this way, and that's why its damage is so insanely high compared to other weapons, even though its attack isn't that much higher than most other endgame weapons. The chicken knife does have the downside of making you flee occasionally, or making you waste turns during bosses, but the extremely easy way around this is to use attacking abilities instead of attack directly. Usually you'll see this with rapid fire, but you can also do it with mug, dance, that one samurai ability that's supposed to paralyze but is bugged so it doesn't actually do that, among other things. And since almost every job can equip knives, that also makes it the ideal weapon choice for 4-job fiestas, because the only job that can use the Brave Blade is the Knight. Anyone that can do damage can use knives, so you've always got at least one high damage option for endgame. Apparently there's a mod out there that fixes the agility damage formula bug, but I haven't tried it myself. The only thing I've heard about it is that it apparently makes knives even more overpowered on jobs that have an even remotely decent agility stat. But even aside from the chicken knife, there's plenty of other good knives. The main Gosh is basically a shield that can be given to mages to give them some survivability. The dancing dagger has a very high attack stat for when you get it, so if you manage to roll Swords Dance with it, it can catapult your damage up if you're lucky enough. The Mage Masher can neuter some bosses with its silence, even if silence isn't a permanent status. The Assassin's Dagger gives almost any job access to an instant kill to anything that isn't heavy. The Air Knife boosts wind damage, primarily for the Blue Mage and the Geomancer. The list goes on. There's also so many knives throughout the game that you're never far from a damage upgrade in a nearby shop. And you almost never miss with knives because they only take 50% of an enemy's evasion into account. Plus, only 2 jobs can't use knives, and those jobs, being Monk and White Mage, don't really need them. The White Mage could probably use the main Gosh, but that's about it. I apologize in advance if I'm pronouncing Gosh incorrectly. I've never actually tried to learn how to say it. I actually don't know if it's right to put broadswords and knight swords in one category, because only knights can use knight swords, but I'm combining them anyway. Swords are just generally strong, and most jobs that can use a sword can also use a shield. Like knives, there's usually a sword upgrade in just about every town, and there's also really good status effect swords that usually inflict permanent statuses, like the Sleep Sword completely shutting down bosses like Atomos and Califisteri, and the Ancient Sword neutering Gilgamesh and Halicarnassus. You've also got some gimmicky stuff like the Excalibur for a good Goblin Punch enhancer, and the Defender for some physical evasion and being able to cast Protect for free. If you have Rapid Fire or Aim, but you also don't have Spellblade for some reason, you can also take the Blood Sword and basically become immortal aside from instant death attacks. That sword has insanely low accuracy, but is really strong and, you know, has the drain effect. Just make sure to stay away from the undead. Speaking of, I didn't really know where to put this, but a big reason why knives and swords are so amazing is that they can be spellbladed. Spellblade is one of the best abilities in the game and one of my personal favorites, and it's easy to see why. It can easily multiply your damage for low MP cost. You get free insta-kills with the Aga Blades or Break Blade, my favorite usage being one-shotting the Almagus section of Neo X-Death with Break Blade. Free status effects so you don't have to worry about magic evasion or accuracy, it's fantastic. I think the only reason that Katanas aren't in S is because they can't be spell-bladed. They'd probably be up here otherwise. And if you manage to never escape from any battle ever, the Brave Blade is a really strong sword. The problem is just that, never fleeing. Unfortunately, the Brave Blade can only get weaker, and the Chicken Knife can only get stronger. Pixel Remaster at least does buff the Brave Blade by letting it slowly get its original power back by just not fleeing and beating enemies. So that's a very welcome buff. Just like in basically every RPG ever made, you really can't go wrong with a sword. Everything from here on is not ordered within tiers. I'm just gonna talk about them in a random order as I think about them. I'll start with katanas. They're notable in that they're one of two weapon types, the others being fists, that are capable of randomly critting. Some specific weapons can crit, like the rune weapons consuming MP, or weapons that crit against certain monster types, but katanas across the board just have a decent chance, usually 15 to 25% depending on which katana it is, to just do tons of damage to whatever poor sap you hit. I think the katana also benefits from being the unique weapon of the samurai, which is already a job that is super stacked with so many amazing attributes. So the katanas being strong is icing on the cake. Most katanas are the same, just being damage upgrades of each other, but a couple in particular stand out. One is the Air Blade, which is a wind element katana that has a chance of casting the Gaia spell Wind Slash, a full party wind move. Assuming whatever you're fighting doesn't resist or absorb wind, this is a pretty great ability most of the time. The other notable katana is, obviously, the legendary one, Masamune, which I think has an argument for being the best legendary weapon. It has two unique features. It'll make the wielder always go first in battle, no matter what, and it casts haste when used as an item. Being able to go first is insane, and there's two major use cases for this in my experience. The first is for regular encounters, where you can slap Flea or Smoke onto a samurai and guarantee you never have to deal with any random encounter for the rest of the game, because that first strike even applies on back attacks. The second is for bosses, where you give your Masamune user something like Time Magic to put up an instant Hastiga on the party, or instant slow on the boss, or an instant mix, whatever. It literally doesn't matter. The haste thing is even more ridiculous though. Giving time magic to jobs that aren't the time mage is a risky move for balance, because time mage is already the best job in the game, specifically for its turn manipulation. In 4-job fiestas, you basically get a second chance of time mage junior in your runs if you manage to roll samurai for your earth crystal job. And depending on your rule set, you could also have a freelancer, and those guys can equip anything. Yeah, you can always give everybody Hermes sandals, but being able to free up the accessory slot is awesome. There's so many great accessories in this game that it could probably fill its own tier list video. Next up is rods. There's actually not that many rods in the game, which kind of surprised me when I looked it up, but there really doesn't need to be a lot of them. The fire, ice, and thunder rods are what single-handedly turns the black mage and summoner's damage from amazing to incredible. You get a free ice rod before Magissa and Forza, and you get the ability to buy an infinite amount of all three not long after for a very cheap 750 gil. Considering right outside Karnak, you can go into the forests, do a fire rod boosted Fyra to instant kill the pack of wolves and get an easy 500 gil. It's super easy to farm for these if you do rod breaking, which yes, is another awesome aspect to these weapons. I typically don't rod break because I find it a bit overpowered even for this game, but if you do use the rods as items in battle, they cast an Aga spell on the entire enemy party. I'm still a little confused on whether the Aga spell is half damage, like if you casted it as a black mage, or if it's a full power one as a unique attribute to the rods, but either way, the damage is insane for early game, and you can basically just spend 750 gil to insta-gib early boss fights before you unlock Samurai to skip the middleman and just throw your money directly. But yes, the 50% elemental damage boost right after unlocking the water crystal jobs is invaluable, and they're useful for basically the entire game up to when you unlock the Magus Rod, which boosts every element at once. except water for some reason. The Poison Rod also exists, and boosts bio damage, and casts a full party bio when used as an item, but I usually don't bother messing with it. I don't know what's weak or resistant or what absorbs poison, and bio is kind of expensive MP-wise, so I just stick to the basic spells. There's also the Lilith Rod, which can cast Osmose and inflict the Flirt status, and the Wonder Rod, which... I mean, just look at this. But I never use these because they're way too gimmicky for me. The Wonder Rod could definitely be great with the right setup, but I'm just not patient enough for it. None of the rods are outright bad though, except for maybe the starting rod. Last for A tier is Staves. I think Staves are the weirdest weapon type because they don't really do any one thing. There's a couple attacking Staves for white mages to do some kind of damage before Holy. There's the Healing Staff, which casts Cura on a party member and is incredibly useful for 4-job Fiesta runs without White Mage or the Chemist. There's the Staff of Light, which is basically the Holy version of the Elemental Rods, but is only gotten from enemy drops or steals, and those enemies are very stingy. There's the Power Staff, which inflicts Berserk, the Judgment Staff, which casts Dispel, and finally there's the Sage Staff, which boosts Holy damage and casts Raise when used as an item. The Staves are so all over the place, it's hard for me to even talk about them as a unified weapon type, but aside from the starting staff and the 2 maces, they're all really good for different reasons. The Healing Staff's use is obvious, and is a mainstay on my party in almost every 4-job Fiesta I ever do. The Dispel Staff has saved my ass on a couple occasions. I even used it in the level 1 run against Shinryu when he casted Mighty Guard on himself. The Berserk Staff isn't super necessary, but a free spell cast is always nice, and can shut down certain bosses if you're ready for the onslaught of high physical damage. Boosting Holy is fantastic, because Holy is both cheap and extremely disproportionately powerful for how cheap it is. You can't go wrong with Staves, and the jobs that can equip them are similarly great. And the Red Mage can equip them too. I was unsure if I should bother to put shields in as a weapon type, because obviously they're more of an armor, but if I was going to rank them anywhere, I think it would be an A. For the most part, your damage dealers are going to be dual-wielding strong weapons, but shields can still be utilized by the support characters or mages for great effect. Early on, they just give you good physical survivability, but the further you go, the more supportive they get, absorbing fire or ice, resisting lightning, a chance to avoid magic altogether, and I'm quite fond of the Genji shield's 50% physical evasion. It might be super impractical, but a mini character that has the Genji shield I think has complete immunity to physical attacks. The downside is that you're mini. Magic is all over the place in Final Fantasy V for you and the enemy, so being able to neutralize it in some way is extremely valuable. I'm not taking the advanced equipment into consideration here, because I'm not familiar with basically any of it, but I am aware there's a shield that just negates all elemental damage done to you, which is insane. It's a drop from Omega Mark II, so you have to beat one of the hardest enemies in the game just to get it, but still, extremely broken. All the B tier weapons are fine. They're okay. First up is spears. Just like the Dragoon, they're fine. It's like the sword, but lamer. There's a lightning spear, a wind spear, and the legendary spear seems to just be the legendary sword, but worse. The dragon lance is legitimately great though, although you have to steal them from crystal dragons, which is kind of annoying. A YouTube comment told me this, but you can use a mixture to turn any enemy into a dragon type and get free infinite crits with dual wielding dragon lances. I used the dual wield dragon lance strategy against Shinryu in the level 1 run and it worked wonders. And he's one of the hardest enemies in the game, so I'm sure it can work great against anything. The downside of that is that you get it in the final dungeon almost right before you fight the final boss, so there's not a whole lot that you can use it on. At least the advanced version adds more bosses and content, so more opportunities for dragon mix shenanigans. Oh yeah, spears make jump do double damage, but I don't care because jump is about as interesting as the Dragoon itself. I'm just going to talk about short swords, boomerangs, and the twin lance altogether because they're all predominantly ninja weapons. Thieves can use boomerangs and the twin lance too, but I don't care. The only short sword worth talking about is the legendary one, which is both strong and has a physical evade chance, which is fantastic for the ninja that can't use shields and is kind of frail. The boomerangs help the frailness by letting him attack from the back row, but the twin lance just forgoes all of that and just lets you attack twice with one hand, letting you do a super bootleg version of rapid fire if you dual wield them. I've also been informed through a comment that if you dual wield the chicken Knife and Twin Lance, where the Twin Lance attacks first, that overrides the Chicken Knife's Flee command, so you can attack freely with it. As if dual wield needed to be any better, but still, that's legitimately great, although in a way that it kind of just makes knives even better, rather than making the Twin Lance itself better. This was also patched in Pixel Remaster, so whether you want to count glitches like this in the weapon's favor is up to you, but it's easy enough to abuse if you don't mind the Twin Lance's damage falling off late game. I guess they're all pretty good and decently strong. The main problem is that there's just not very many of them. There's 2 boomerangs and 3 short swords. I don't really know what else to say here. Fists are pretty good. As mentioned, they're one of the 2 weapon types that can crit, and they're innately dual-wielded, so you get double crit chance. Even if it's impractical, doing build-up and getting a crit with it to see that ×4 damage is a pretty big dopamine rush. I think the intro of Final Fantasy V is designed pretty interestingly. Galuf starts with no weapon, so you have to go through the pirate cave with him doing dog shit damage with his fist. But then you get access to the monk. As a player, you may think, well, you attacked twice, so maybe it'll be good now? And for the most part, it is. Pretty ballsy of them to make the fist so terrible starting off, but to have faith in the player to give it a second chance when the opportunity arises. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the bare-fisted mage strategy. It takes 45 ABP to get barehanded for your character, which gives them the monk's strength as long as you equip no weapon. This works great for mages early game before they get super damaging spells, so they can mostly take care of themselves until the enemies start outpacing the damage or they get attacking spells worth a damn. It definitely helps on saving Gil early game. However, that kind of demonstrates the main problem with fists, in that they fall off pretty badly late game. There's unfortunately no legendary fist, so the game has a band-aid fix for any die-hard monk players in the Kaiser Knuckles from the Great Sea Trench. It boosts your unarmed damage, which helps a lot, but you have to equip it in the accessory slot, which kinda undermines it. If it had been a weapon the monk can equip, akin to the Sword of Kings from Earthbound, or like how Yang in Final Fantasy IV can equip fist weapons, it would have been a lot better, I think. Lastly, we have bows. Bows are kind of interesting. I think there's only one normal bow in the game, that being the silver bow. Every other bow either has an element attached to it, or inflicts a status effect, or has a crit chance, or one of them even has a chance of just doing rapid fire when you attack with it. The Final Fantasy wiki says that bows have the knife thing of only taking 50% evasion into account, but I must be really unlucky because in my experience they miss a lot. Rangers do at least have access to aim innately, so that circumvents that. Pixel Remaster also buffed bows to do double damage against flying enemies, so combine that with the Avis killer and I assume you'll be doing super heavy damage to any Avises you come across, and there's not very many in World 3, so... The biggest problem with the bows, really, is the job they're attached to. Ranger just isn't that great of a job, and rapid fire is the only reason most people even tolerate it, unless you're a weirdo that actually likes animals. Bows are also two-handed, so you couldn't use a shield with them even if you wanted to. They're not horrible, but they're not making me double take either. I don't know why axes and hammers are 2 different weapon types, but they're both exclusive to the Berserker, so we're combining them. But here's how these weapons work. They only take 25% of an enemy's defense into account, but they do anywhere from 50% to 150% of their regular damage. Add that to the fact that these weapons miss all the goddamn time, and you have a weapon type that is a dice roll waiting to happen. That damage variance is alleviated somewhat by the Berserk status giving you a 50% damage buff, but even then it's sometimes not enough. Plus it's not like you can buff the damage of a miss. Some of the weapons are decent though. I've gotten a ton of use out of the Death Scythe because it's one of the earliest forms of instant death you can get. The Gaia Hammer is great if you get it from Titan in World 1, and gets even better in World 3 when you get the Thornlit and you can use the magic underflow glitch. That's SNES version exclusive, unfortunately. Thor's Hammer is a row ignoring hammer, which is great because in some versions of this game, the Berserker can attack enemies in the back row for half damage, adding even more to the damage variance of this job. The Rune Axe is pretty good because 1, the Berserker isn't using his MP for anything else, and 2, it puts magic into the damage formula, so sticking some kind of magic into his empty ability slot, like summon or white or black, to boost his magic stat is actually super useful. Unfortunately, maybe, depending on your version, the Rune Axe actually boosts the Berserker's magic by 3, so it's actually impossible to do the magic underflow glitch with it equipped. I'd I'd like to see what its damage would look like if you could get the glitch activated. If axes and hammers are all you have, such as a worst party run, then they can be decent, but in most battles I'd rather use literally anything else. The whip is one of the most inexplicable weapon types in this game. It ignores row, which is good, and the Beastmaster's strength isn't terrible, and most whips have a high chance to inflict paralyze, which is also good. But a couple of whips instead cast a spell for a bonus effect, instead of the paralysis, which makes no sense because the Beastmaster has a magic penalty of -3. It's bad enough when you get the Shock Whip in Jackal Cave and the thunder does like 30 damage, but it gets even worse when you discover that the Legendary Whip casts Faraga sometimes instead of Paralyze. If I wanted Faraga, I'd be using a Black Mage or something, not this mediocre gimmicky back row melee job. Barely anything the party can do can inflict paralysis. The only thing that comes to mind is Deathclaw, so it seems like such a waste to throw that gimmick away just to cast some shitty spells. The Dragon's Whisker is alright, it's good for the same reason as the Dragon Lance, but this one is inexplicably much harder to get. It's either a drop from the Stingray, that thing that never shows up that you can get Mighty Guard from, or a rare steal from fucking Shinryu. I just don't get this weapon at all. The last two are Bells and Harps, but I think it's fine that these weapons are down here, because they're not really supposed to be used for fighting. I'll talk about Bells first, because I'd say they're more of a victim of circumstance than an actually bad weapon type. The main problem is that they're exclusive to a job whose signature ability is completely free. There are very few situations in this game where 1. Gaia is available and doesn't do anything, and 2. The Geomancer doesn't have another secondary ability that covers the weakness of Gaia occasionally being useless. The Legendary Bell has a neat effect, being that it boosts earth damage and sometimes casts Quake, but first off, the Summoner gets Titan and the Gaia armor in the first third of the game, and second, the fact that it's not guaranteed means we're in the same spot as if we were just hit Gaia anyway. The Rune Chime is pretty decent, where it does crits using MP, and boosts all elemental damage, except water, again. But it's a rare drop from an enemy in the beginning section of the Rift, so it's very unlikely you'll ever see it or even know that it exists. There's only 4 bells in this game, and you'll probably only ever see 2 of them. You get the first bell in Tycoon Castle, and you won't see another bell until all the way in World 3 where you get the legendary one. The other 2 bells are gotten from the final dungeon. This is another one of those the devs just liked other weapons slash jobs more things, because it's just peculiar that element boosting rods of the Black Mage and Summoner are so readily available, but to get the equivalent for the Geomancer is so out of the way and late game. Even without that bell, you still have to wait till the end of World 2 to get the Air Knife. It's a similar problem to Arrow from the Blue Mage. Also, Gaia is supposed to be representing the Earth's elements. I mean, that's why it's called Gaia. So it primarily focuses on the crystal elements, earth, wind, water, fire. So the fact that this elemental bell doesn't boost water is even weirder. Someone made a comment that the Magus Rod not boosting water could be a feature because the devs didn't want Leviathan to be stronger than Bahamut, but that doesn't explain why this bell is the same way. Not like water spells are super common from Gaia, like the game as a whole, but again, the oversight, deliberate or not, just keeps coming back to bite certain aspects of this game in the ass. I think one of the best places for the Earth Bell would be against Neo Exdeath, but that's actually the only fight in the game that I'm aware of that Gaia is actually guaranteed to get a certain outcome, that being Wind Slash, so equipping the Air Knife and going to town with that is much more reliable there. If you actually use a bell for attacking, you'll find its damage is pretty decent for a mage weapon, but again, because of the job it's attached to, you'll almost never use it. At least the attacking animation is neat. Harps definitely aren't a weapon that's actually supposed to be used for attacking, at least not regularly. Out of the 4 harps, only one of them, the legendary one, does actual damage, and the rest do percent-based damage. Very, very low percent-based damage. 2 of them inflict Confuse and Sleep, which is great in theory, except because they do percent damage, that means they'll automatically fail against any enemy with a heavy flag, even if they're actually vulnerable to Confuse and Sleep. I will admit, the Apollo's Harp does crazy high damage against dragons and undead, and there's no shortage of those kind of enemies in the late game. It makes farming for Dragon Fangs against the undead dragons a total cakewalk, but it goes back to the victim of circumstance thing from the bells. Bards usually aren't going to be attacking, you're using them for setting up your songs, be it the debuff or regen songs early game, or the strength magic level songs late game. And to a lesser extent, the bard kind of undermines itself with the undead thing, because midway through World 2 you get Requiem, which is a full party hitting attack that damages undead for pretty good damage. That damage is nowhere near as strong as the Apollo Harp, but considering it's full party, it has its uses, especially in the Great Sea Trench. Oh yeah, and harps are two-handed, just like bows, so no shields for you on this super frail back row class. So yeah, not great weapon types, but I don't think they were designed to be. I don't think it's a failure of game design or anything that these two are down here. Not everything has to be viable. Well, that's all. This is a much shorter video than I usually make about this game. As I said in the beginning, I'd like to see other people's opinions on the weapons, and how wrong I am about bells being bad, or how staves are actually terrible, or spears are god tier, or whatever. Getting more info about how other people play this game is super interesting and helps me a lot for future runs, along with it just generally being fun to increase my knowledge about the game. If there's anything else you'd like to see about this game, let me know in the comments. See ya.